Okay, it looks like we're live. I'm here with Joseph P. Farrell, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, a colleague and friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. Joseph, nice to have you here and for this spontaneous, informal chat.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Yeah, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
And I know that you were in the chat room when I was on live with Jimmy Church last night, where we did a long talk about the trademark brouhaha with Corey Good and the everything over the secret space program. And just so listeners or viewers can know, we've been involved in some private email back and forth with other people on our list, including Catherine. We can mention Daniel Litz, I assume, dark journalist, and a few other people. And why don't you just jump in and let's talk about your thoughts on what's the significance, of if there's any significance over the trademarking issue, and just over the whistleblower phenomenon, relating to a secret space program and people like Corey Good.
Well, you know me, Richard. I really am kind of on the fringe of the UFO community. By fringe, I don't mean out there. I just mean that I'm on the periphery of it. And my approach, like yours, has always leaned much more heavily toward documents, trying to figure out the science. My basic, I guess you'd say, epistemology is that anyone can get in front of a camera and tell a story. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you discard what they say. It means that you have to corroborate it somehow by contextual information or background research or what have you. So I don't think it's simply a case of all whistleblowers are illegitimate. The problem I have here is and again, I have not been a close follower of this whole story. People send me information about it from time to time, and what they send is what I know. But it strikes me that here you have a case of the construction. My background is in academic theology. Here you have a case of the construction of a kind of a Gnostic cult, and the use and importation of terms from American evangelical Christianity, like testimony and so on and so forth. I believe that Mr. Good has that kind of a background somewhere in his history. It's the use and importation of this sort of stuff that disturbs me, because when you couple this, and I do think the trademark issue is a very serious issue, because for me it goes to free speech. What you're trying to do, as far as I'm concerned, is you're trying to use trademark as a copyright, and that to me already is kind of, I'm not a lawyer, but it strikes me as being in some legal gray areas here, because in the process of trying to trademark concepts, which is what I really think is going on here, I think you could be looking at a kind of an attempt to get the camel's nose in the door by picking an out of the way area and trademarking all the concepts that have, we've talked about for several years. I've talked about for several years. I mean, if we really want to go back, I wouldn't be surprised to find the term secret space program or some analog thereof in, early UFO researchers, Frank Edwards, Major Kehoe, and so on. So the idea of trademarking a concept to me is very disturbing. And it's not disturbing to me so much because it's simply Mr. Good involved in this process, but C.W. Chanter raised a very interesting point last night. He did kind of a post Jimmy Church, Richard Dolan show wrap up last night.
I actually caught about 5 minutes of it. I might have listened longer, but it was late for us.
Well, I listened to some of it, and he made a very interesting point. He apparently is a lawyer. And one of the points that he made that I found very disturbing was, trademarks are intellectual property. They can be bought and sold. And if the trademark vests and he sells the trademark to, let's say, a major corporation with deep enough pockets, and this is something that Catherine Fitz has also brought out, if they sell it to a corporation with deep enough financial pockets, they can simply shut down everything by involving everybody in litigation. So in other words, this is, as far as I'm concerned, a very important First Amendment issue. Do we have the right as researchers in this community to talk about concepts that, you know, everybody has used more or less, and elaborate different hypotheses about those concepts? Or do those concepts belong to a certain narrow circle of people to control the narrative? And this is what profoundly disturbs me about this.
That's very, oh, I'm sorry. I just jumped in. I thought you were wrapping up.
When you couple that corporate approach to this field and couple it with this emergence of a kind of neo-Gnostic cult, that's very, very disturbing to me. Because in effect, what you're setting up is you're setting up the potential for a corporation to move in and proclaim itself as kind of the magisterium for the whole entire field. You know, this is acceptable narrative, that isn't acceptable narrative, and shut down the unacceptable narrative simply by litigation. You know, it's the equivalent of a papal interdict, if you will. Yeah. So, you know, I'm looking at all of this and I'm kind of aghast at where this is all going. And I think, you know, it needs to be stopped.
Well, I agree with you completely. What I didn't realize or hadn't thought about is the potential for these trademarks to be bought and sold. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they can be. I had not gone into that train of thought, but it is very that's troubling to say the least. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, trademarking phrases is not an unusual thing. I mean, no. Authors trademark works of fiction all the time, and probably other things are trademarked as well, and not always, my understanding, in a restrictive sense. So if I were to trademark something, it wouldn't permit me to prevent you from using that same phrase for something different. Mm-hmm. But it could prevent you legally from using that phrase for the purposes that I use it for. Like, so right. That's the thing. And this, of course, was what Corey Good's lawyer tried to do ham-fistedly, I thought, recently with Jason Rice, another of these whistleblowers who's come forward to have his story and talk about a secret space program.
Right.
So, yeah, the attempt to just shut somebody down.
Yes.
This is the really dangerous era that we're in. And I'm guessing we agree on this. Like, I've seen what's going on here in the UFO side of it as really paralleling a lot of the very dangerous developments that are happening in our society writ large. This whole attempt to limit the range of speech that people are allowed to have, or without repercussions of being deplatformed and so on. Mm-hmm. It seems to me there's a definite counterattack by, I'm calling it the establishment, to push back against the freedoms of the web and of the internet, and to try to get back to the happy days for them when they were able to control all the means of discourse. But yeah, so because of that, I think people like Corey Good on this occasion have been able to use that environment to some extent and to continue to shut discourse down in our field. But yeah, the possibility you could sell it to a corporation, hadn't thought about that. That's a definite concern as well. But how strong is this case, do you think? Like, well, in our email, I know Catherine, she was in touch with one of her attorneys who said this looked weak as hell from any kind of, and you know, the likelihood of this going in and being approved in the patent office, these SSP and Blue Avian and all of these other things, Guardians, gosh, Return of the Guardians.
Right.
These are like out of Star Wars type episodes, it seems to me. But if he's able to patent SSP for secret space program, that just seems like it can't happen, or can it?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but, you know, part of this scenario, Richard, I agree with you. I think it's part of the bigger phenomenon that we've been watching with the deplatforming of other people, you know, that are not in ufology, but, you know, working in other areas in this whole alternative research sphere, for want of a bit. I use the word sphere. And, you know, I in prepping for this interview today, I also noted that they wanted to patent the phrase sphere being alliance or something similar to that.
Yeah, that's the phrase, sphere being alliance.
Well, you know, when I looked at that, I thought, my word, you know, Plato, Origin, you know, these ancient philosophers and ecclesiastical writers were talking about souls in the shape of spheres. There's even an anathema, the 10th anathema, the Fifth Ecumenical Council, specifically anathematizing the idea that souls are, you know, these disembodied spheres. And I thought, well, what are you going to do? You know, are you going to sue the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and the Church of England because they accept the Fifth Ecumenical Council, you know, and this anathema? So, you know,
well, he could if they were to use that phrase for his, you know, in any way relating to him. I think that's the specific. And I was looking at the letter that his lawyer sent to Jason Rice, which I have here, and she was just saying, where the heck is it now? But basically, they were particularly focused on preventing him at that time, before he went on to Jimmy Church's show, from speaking about SSP, the secret space program, and she said like a host of related subjects as it pertained to Corey Goode. There was some kind of legal qualifier in there, but it was so impossible to interpret. Like, so it just struck me as a form of intimidation without any genuine legal basis.
Well, it is a form of intimidation, and the problem I have with it is even if you're just trying to trademark the letters SSP. Well, you and I were both speakers at the 2014 Secret Space Program conference in San Mateo, and their website logo for the conference did have those letters SSP very prominently displayed. The same thing again in Bastrop, and I don't know about the one in Amsterdam that you also spoke at, but you know, this idea has been out there for quite some time, and there was no mention in her letter, as far as I can tell, of any prior use. And again, prior use establishes something in the community. It's a common term. It's not something that's an intellectually, in the way I understand the law, which is about as far as you can throw me. But it's prior use establishes a community use of a term, and that's certainly been out there. The concept has been out there. So this is what bothers me. You're right. It's intimidation. And if you go ahead and sell these trademark applications, if he is actually vested with these things, then the problem becomes, like I said before, what happens, and again, this is C.W. Chanter's observation, what happens if they sell it to a corporation with big pockets?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, you can shut down all of this conversation simply by the mere act of litigation. You may not be successful ultimately in the litigation, but in the meantime, you've tied up the community and sapped the energy out of it when they could be doing research. And this is what bothers me about all of this. And while we're talking about this, something else has always bothered me about the timing of these things, because we had those secret space program conferences, Amsterdam, San Mateo, Bastrop, and then out of the blue, here comes Tom DeLonge with the To the Stars Academy and Corey Goode with whatever it is he's doing. And it seems to me like this was a concerted pushback effort from the fact that you had an independent thing growing here, you know, different researchers that were getting together to present their findings, and it was being well received. And then wham, you know, we get this response with these marketing operations, which is what I think they are. So this is disturbing to me too. And there's apparently some big backing, as far as I can tell, behind both of these guys. And that's disturbing to me because, again, this brings up this potential threat that corporate pockets could fund all of this.
Well, I don't know if you caught this when I was chatting with Jimmy Church last night. One of the things that I wanted to point out was simply the long history of U.S. intelligence community infiltration of the UFO community. And what a lot of that is confirmable. Some of it isn't 100% confirmable, but it looks like it and smells like it. One of the things that smells like it is the infiltration by contactees way back in the 1950s.
Right.
George Adamski and George Hunt Williamson and George Van Tassel and some of these others appear to have had connections or strongly suspected connections to U.S. intelligence. In the case of Van Tassel, it's been confirmed. Some of the others, it just looks like it. But the point is, this was right after the Robertson panel conclusions of early 1953, where they stated explicitly, yes, we need to infiltrate these organizations. We need to debunk the topic for the public. And so this could easily it certainly looks like it would have come out of that program. And what did it do? It helped to ridicule and derail the phenomenon. It helped to keep serious academic researchers away from the subject. Those who might have been interested in going into it stayed away because of the ridiculousness of some of these contactees who claim to have gone on trips to Venus and the like. And so it pushed the field back, for a generation or more than that. And well, just the last thing is like with the secret space program panels, conferences that we did, and that continued in 2015. It's arguably, you could say, like these were like the vanguard of discussion at that time.
Yes.
Right. On the reality of a true secret space program, a real one. And I guess, I mean, what do you think? Do you feel that this was becoming a danger that had to be disabled in some way?
Oh, absolutely. I think that. Absolutely. I think that because what those conferences represented were not collections of people, whistleblowers, telling their stories. What they were collections of researchers that were examining this or that aspect of the nuts and bolts of secret space programs. If you're going to have a secret space program, well, you've got to have financing. So Catherine Fitz and I were talking about financing. You had Michael Schratt talking about some of the technology, Mark McCandlish talking about some of the technology. So in other words, this was a serious attempt to just kind of pool all that research material out there. And there's something else that disturbs me about the current phenomenon. And you mentioned George Van Tassel and George Adamski. Well, I wrote a book a few years ago called Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, and I looked at the Adamski material rather closely. And what jumped out at me, Richard, again, with my theology background, was the amount of religious template at work in Adamski. You had out in the desert revelations where Adamski has to go over a hill. And I'm thinking, my word, this sounds like Moses on the mountain at Sinai.
It really does.
Yeah.
Really
and in addition to this, Adamski's given a message. And he's made, so to speak, the appointed ambassador, the chosen magisterium to put out a message for the rest of the community. Well, you compare that template that's going on with George Adamski and what you see in Corey Goode, and you have this template reappearing again. And it's the same old thing, kind of dressed up in more modern clothes, where someone is claiming to have kind of an exclusive privilege to bring the message to humanity. And this is what I find very disturbing about the whole thing. And again, you add that to corporate money to make that message stick. And precisely, you're ridiculing the entire field of research, and you're tarring it with the brush of lunacy, quite literally. And no one is going to take the concept of breakaway civilizations or secret space programs or hidden systems of finance and all of this stuff very seriously. So yeah, I think there's a template, and it's the presence of that template which was used so successfully in the 1950s, as you point out, by the intelligence community, that makes me suspect that we're looking at the same thing all over again right here.
I agree with that. Corey Good isn't the only person in this field, even in recent times, to kind of be portrayed or portray himself, or to allow himself to be portrayed as a kind of quasi-cultish religious guru type figure. There have been lots of others. And in fact, to varying degrees, there's all kinds of variations. And sometimes these things just happen. I don't know if they happen fully by design by the person, or they just kind of fall into it. But you've had Stephen Greer, you've had Richard Hoagland, you've had David Wilcock. Just for starters, these are also individuals that one can arguably say have had either consistently or at various times a kind of cult-like status among followers who just, and in all cases, all four of those individuals, Corey and David and Stephen Greer and Hoagland, at least for a while, they're all portrayed as the indispensable person,
right?
Like without whom none of this works. They're the conduit through which the insiders or the special information, or in theological terms, revelation,
right,
would appear through the masses. They're the conduit. I think that's aside from the information that's possessed. I suspect that it's that that angle, that element that many of us find just utterly distasteful. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, you're the self-appointed Messiah,
right?
People really act like this, and I just I suspect that this is one of the reasons psychologically for so much pushback that we see, aside from just the disinformation that's often involved.
Right. And the other thing that this does, let's look at it from this kind of religious perspective for a moment, a little bit deeper. The other thing that this does, if you establish somebody as the anointed Messiah, the apostle to the masses, what you're attempting to do is also establish their narrative as the canon by which all other narratives must be measured. And certainly that has been, as far as I can tell from my exposure to the good material, there has certainly been an effort made to do precisely that, and to borrow from other people's research and squeeze it into this narrative, and in the process, they end up making other people say things that they really haven't said, So to me, to me, the whole thing is just, it's got to be stopped. This trademarking thing is really kind of epistemological warfare, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, the trademark, my understanding of it is that it's pending, obviously. So, and it's pending in the event that no one is challenging it. Is that right? So I think there's got to be a challenge to it, and if someone, I actually don't know how this works. Maybe the lawyer, some legal expert listening to this, can explain how one can issue an objection to the patent, or to the trademark. How that works.
Yeah, as far as I know, Richard, there is a process. I don't know what it is, because this is just literally hit, this last weekend.
Yeah.
There is, as far as I can tell, some sort of way that you register opposition to the granting of a trademark. Now, I don't know if that has to be done by individuals, or if this has to be done by an attorney representing a group of individuals. I really have no idea. And like you say, let's hope that there's an attorney out there listening to this that would understand how to go through that process and get it started.
Seems like this is a good thing for us to do. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm sure I would have no problem participating in that, to be honest.
No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah, a good lawyer to help walk us through.
Right.
But I would definitely participate. And I'm sure a lot of other people would be interested in doing that.
Well, yeah, if you get right down to it, Richard, what really is going on? Let's just look at the effect on the whistleblower community. Because if you have a group of people out there that, for whatever reason, have had these encounters or had these experiences or been involved in some aspect of what you've called the breakaway civilization, if this is allowed to stand, then what you're also doing is you're sending a message to any of those people potentially that might want to come out and tell their story, not to do so. Or if you do come out and tell your story, well, we're gonna slap you with lawsuits, or we're going to fit it into our narrative and scramble your story. So you're doing as far as I'm concerned, Richard, you're doing a great deal of harm by this whole approach. And again, I think this is the camel's nose in the door. They I think have picked a kind of an out of the way subject area to perhaps try to ram through some sort of legal precedent that, if it's allowed to get established, then affects all aspects of the alternative community. Not just ufology, but conspiracy theory, politics, culture, everything. And if you allow the trademarking of a concept that has been in popular use in an attempt to shut it down, just imagine how that spins out to the political discourse in this country. It's part of this phenomenon, as you said.
Absolutely. What a great way to put that. We're in an era now, I'm utterly convinced that the prevalence of the phrase fake news is very soon, if not already, actually going to be used against the alternative community to shut and deplatform
right
opposing voices. I don't think that the pretext of fake news has been used yet to do that. They're still working on hate speech for that one.
Yeah.
But fake news, I think, is in the wings. And there's all these tools that are coming into place by the powerful to limit the range of discussion by free-thinking people. And this trademarking of phrases is another potentially really dangerous tool that can be used to prevent people from jumping in. By the way, I know that Corey Goode has said that he's not attempted to trademark the phrase secret space program, and that is true. There's no, but I was told there's a gentleman who's contacted me, and he's a very qualified legal expert with a focus on IP, intellectual property, and dealing with corporations. Who said to me, and he has not been able to confirm this, but he's looking, but he believes that there was an attempt by Corey Goode to trademark the actual phrase secret space program, but that it was declined. But I can't confirm that, but this gentleman has said he is searching for that, and he believes that is true. But what is true is if one were to, I believe this is true, if you were to search secret space program in the patent system, get that, but you would get the SSP pending for Corey Goode in the trademark system there. So there's a lot of reason to think that secret space program as a phrase itself could be next in line.
Yeah, and if that's the case, it really shows you that public denials notwithstanding, this is where they want to take it. This is how they want to use it. And again, as far as I know, Richard, the problem here is prior use. It's been in prior use for quite some time. I used the phrase in SS Brotherhood of the Bell.
Yeah, the earliest, there's people who've been doing research on this, and I believe the earliest phrase that people have found so far, it's in a book I have downstairs actually by a researcher named Bill Hamilton from around 1991 called Cosmic Top Secret, and he explicitly uses the phrase secret space program. So that's 1990 or so that's 28 years ago. I'm not sure if Kehoe or Frank Edwards or some of those guys used it back in the 50s or 60s, but it's totally possible a researcher can find it. But certainly it's a concept that's been with us for many, many years, and no one's got the right to own that. How ridiculous.
Right. And since we're mentioning people that may have used it, as I recall, Timothy Good may have used this phrase in a couple of his books. And certainly he's been talking about the concept.
Yeah.
So, this to me is nothing but a not too disguised attempt to shut down discussion, precisely the type of discussion that we saw occurring at those secret space program conferences. And it wasn't, again, by discussion, I'm not simply talking about the formal speaker's presentation. I'm also talking about the little knots of people that gather outside and continue discussing these things and sharing ideas and so on and so forth. Well, if you're going to trademark something like this, you're attempting to shut down that kind of informal discussion as well. So I can't view this as anything else than an operation to shut this down and to limit First Amendment rights, to limit research. The other effect that people have to stop and consider here is that this would really throw a huge monkey wrench into any sort of academic research, because you can start trademarking phrases that occur in normal academic research in order to shut down certain avenues that you don't want people pursuing. So this, as far as I'm concerned, Richard, here, the implications of all of this are just in the main not good at all across the board. It's not something that I view as limited simply to the ufology community. This is going to strike everything, and it's not going to do anybody any good in the long run.
My take on this is that his lawyer actually read the law wrong. And you can correct me if you've got a different take on this, but like trademarking a phrase, like if you're, let's say you're J.K. Rowling, you trademark Harry Potter, which I presume she did. So that does that prevent other people from writing about Harry Potter? Well, no. Like there's books about Harry Potter. There's analyses of Harry Potter. There's, my God, there's Harry Potter fan fiction that's out there. And I assume she can't stop that. So the trademarking has a limited, supposed to be a very well-defined, territory. And my assumption had been, when I first heard all of this a couple of weeks ago, that he was simply engaged in a standard money battle with Gaia over rights of the usage of this for future TV shows that he's doing and so on. And if he were to do it for that purpose only, I don't know how much of an opinion I would have on this. I would just think, well, it's just another sordid money fight and whatever. But when his lawyer attempted to stop another claimed whistleblower from speaking. And now, I mean, it seems to me that this is the lawyer that doesn't, I don't really think that this lawyer knows the proper restrictions of what a trademark would entail. Seems to me like trademark doesn't mean, it shouldn't mean that you own the phrase, but I admit, like my understanding of this is a little bit fuzzy, because it does prevent other competitors from using your product with your name that you trade. So they're treating Secret Space Program like their product.
Right.
The Blue Avians like a product. They're treating the Return of the Guardians like a product.
Right.
Which can tell us a lot about how they actually see the truth value of what they're even talking about. Like,
yes.
If you're talking about some historical reality, why on earth would you trademark their name? Like that's their name. Like, what an insult to them by attempting to do that. This is the kind of action that one would expect a writer of fiction, or commercial, like a manufacturer or a commercial entity, to do to their products.
Right.
And,
well, I tend to think that you're onto something there, because again, I watched a couple of videos of C.W. Chanter, and again, as I recall, he is an attorney, and he raised this precise point that trademark is, in this sphere, something that is normally applied to works of fiction. And by attempting to do that, are you really saying then that everything that you're doing is fiction? My problem also arises out of the fact that, again, as far as I understand trademarks, which again is not very far, but that trademarks are something given to protect your business, your actual commerce that arises off that phrase. All right. So what does that mean then for the folks from the Netherlands that have hosted these secret space program conferences, use the letters SSP and so on and so forth? Does prior use give them the right to continue to do so under the law? I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that, yeah, we have a heavy-handed approach here. And I agree with you. I think she's kind of misconstruing the law a bit. But again, I think it's ultimately for the purpose. I think we're watching an operation precisely designed to create a legal precedent here and shut down the discussion. Because like you've pointed out, this is part of a much wider trend that we've seen going on with respect to the alternative research community of simply trying to shut people down and shut them up and hurt their business, drive them out of business, and so on. So this is something, again, that I think just absolutely has to be stopped, or at least failing that, queried rather heavily and made clear that for the most part, this community stands against this attempt to shut down the discussion. The one thing that I've noticed it has produced is a great deal of unanimity from all corners of the community that have come out against this.
Yeah, I think this was the thing. This was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Like, this had been building for a while, and a lot of researchers, like, it was obvious you were aware of his presence, I think vaguely, but I don't think you bothered to spend a lot of time to dive into it. And that's because you're doing serious research and you're thinking, here comes another one. And how do we, but enough is enough. Like, this is a defining moment, I think,
right,
in this little phase of this area of UFO controversy. And I think people have just said, no, we're not going to do it. I would like to ask you, we've talked about this, and I think it would be helpful here to reiterate, like, we both have argued, and other people have argued, that there is a strong reason to believe that there is a genuine secret space program, and one that probably, I would say very probably, has exotic technology that's off limits to most people. And so there's something real there. And would you care to offer your take on what is the nature, what are the extent and limits of that, the real secret space program? I mean, realizing that a lot of this is based on certain facts and then certain areas of speculation as well.
Well, I've always been kind of a nuts and bolts person with respect to this whole thing, and the thing that got me onto this was your comment in the UFO national security state books about breakaway civilizations. And I'm paraphrasing here. I don't remember exactly what you wrote, but you pointed out that if given enough time, and given the fact that the UFO is going to be looked at by the national security state as a potential threat, and it's going to attempt to emulate this technology, it's going to require two things. It's going to require an infrastructure, a secret infrastructure, and we certainly see that, and all of the border controls that would go with the idea of a breakaway civilization, in the form of classification, access to programs, access to facilities, and so on. And the second thing you're going to require, in addition to a fairly substantial infrastructure, is you're going to require a lot of money over a prolonged period of time. It's going to make the Manhattan Project pale by comparison, because you're dealing literally with something that's going to last decades. So you're going to have to set up, in my opinion, you're going to have to set up a hidden system of finance to sustain this. So, looking at it that way, I began looking at these bearer bond scandals, which I think are definitely a part of this system. You're looking at the recovery of World War II Axis loot and shoving it into the National Security Council, which again definitely happened. And then you've got Catherine Fitz coming along and noticing all this money is disappearing in the trillions of dollars out of the federal budget. And that's just in the last few years. If we're dealing with something going back to World War II, possibly beyond that, then we're looking at a heck of a lot of money. So I think it's very large. And one of the things here, let's shift attention from Corey Goodnow for a moment to Tom DeLonge and to the Stars Academy. As far as I know, the capitalization for that company is somewhere around $55 million or something like this. And part of the stated goals of their company is we want to build, this technology. And I'm thinking, wait a minute here. There again, the money that is being raised and the the capitalization of that corporation are not nearly enough money to build a ship.
Not even close.
Not even close. We go back to the 2014 San Mateo conference and Mark McCandlish's presentation of the alien construction vehicle and all the detail that he brought into that discussion. These big, enormous, artificially grown quartz crystals. Well, one of those things might take $55 million to grow. I'm thinking, again, the capitalization and what we're being told and what the reality probably is are two different things. It's not anywhere close to enough money to build any sort of ship that is actually there or present in the record.
I could never understand the business model that they were basing this on. Like, you've got an entertainment side of it, that's Tom DeLonge's part, and you've got like this hardcore scientific above white world skunkworks, basically.
Right.
Like, you're going to compete with skunkworks, except with like a tiny fraction of the money that skunkworks have. Like, how's that going to work? Like,
yeah, exactly. Building an SR-71 Blackbird is going to take a lot more money than $55 million, let alone a flying saucer. So I'm with you. I have to wonder, what's this business model really all about? Are we looking at another op? You put 55.
I feel like the naive one here. Like, everyone in our community is like wondering, why is Dolan so easy on these people? And I have been easy on them because I'm not 100% sure that it's an op. I mean, yes, Jimmy Church even got on my case about it last night. Why don't you think that this is? I'm sure you were listening to that, and all I could say is I think that it is possible that people involved in that program, and of course I mentioned explicitly Hal Puthoff, the only one of them that I've known personally,
right?
Who I genuinely have respect for that man, and I know that he knows things.
Sure.
I know that. And I know that he's been very genuine with me, and I know with other researchers as well. And he's got a very good reputation among those people who've met him. And so I believe he's got integrity. And for that reason, and then, I was very deeply impressed by his speech for SSE last June, where he talked a lot about some very, very important things, and some of it in connection to TTSA. So my attitude is, I don't know that it's an op, and I'm just I'm continuing to wait and see. But if I turned out to be wrong, then I'll.
Well, when I say it, my suspicion is that it's an op. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on Dr. Puthoff, certainly, nor for that matter on Tom DeLonge. I think Mr. DeLonge is very sincere, and that he's trying to do what he thinks is good. I don't have any problem with that at all. And like you say, Puthoff has an established reputation in the physics community. He's written gobs of scientific papers. So it could be that maybe he knows something in terms of the technology and the cost of that technology that we don't. That could very well be. My whole problem with it, and my opinion that it could be an op is really based on the timing of this. This is coming out more or less at the same time that this Corey Good thing happens. They're raising capital. Is this company going to turn around and buy Corey Good's trademarks? You know, we're into the realm of speculation here, but I do think a part of this is, again, to me, it's an attempt to kind of steer or be able to control the narrative, and the trademark issue enters here in the form of, are they trying to establish a kind of an intellectual monopoly over the narrative? I don't think ultimately that will succeed. There's always going to be a way around. People are going to find a way around anything like that. So from that standpoint of view, it may not be an op. But I tend to think that the timing of it here with the Corey Good phenomenon and this whole trademark thing, the rise of Gaia TV, I tend to think that, you know, coincidences don't just happen, especially, you know, as we both know, especially in this field of research. So I lean more towards the ops side, but I'm a little. I'm with you. When you get people like Putoff involved and so on, then it may be something different, and we're not yet seeing the final product here.
Yeah, I don't, you know, no one wants to be naive, and I don't want to be naive about this either. And everyone's got motivations.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's got their own private motivations, and I would guess, I haven't gotten this from Hal Putoff, but I would guess that he would love to gain access to more crash retrieval materials. So that
oh, sure.
And,
absolutely.
You know, have some kind of breakthrough. I'm sure that's almost explicitly what he said. So it's not even a secret desire. I don't think. I get one thing I would just say about a secret space program from my point of view is I like you. I believe it's a virtual certainty, and I think actually the case is very strong based on the history of UFO crash retrievals, something I'm very, very interested in, and for which I think there's a strong case in many of them. Many of these alleged crash retrievals, I think, are real events that did happen, by which we recovered very exotic technology that then was brought into deeply classified places to study. And then, on top of that, the very, very good leaks that have come from the legitimate aviation journalists going back to the 1980s, guys like James Goodall, for example, who interviewed a number of people out of Groom Lake who talked about ultra black technologies that were way, way beyond anything that we had. Star Wars, Star Trek type stuff. As crazy as that sounded in the 1980s. The ARV story from 1988 is one that I've always credited. And many, many others. So when you put the story of crash retrievals together, and then you look at the various leaks that have come out, including Lazar, including the work of George Knapp, who interviewed dozens of people beyond Bob Lazar, who've corroborated significant parts of Lazar's story. That tells me, A, we recovered things. B, we're trying to replicate those things. C, it's being done in ultra secrecy. And then D, there's a strong history of space-based UFO activities, space-based anomalies. They're confirmed. So when you've got this type of thing happening, there's an extreme perceived need by the secret keepers to, if nothing else, investigate what's going on out there with ultra secret means.
Right.
By definition, that would be a secret space program by itself. But then on top of this, some of the technology that is probably, I would say almost certainly, being kept from us, allowing these people to have vastly greater capabilities than what we have. The real question that I've always had all along, and I still don't have this answer, is how far? How far do they go? Do they have portal technology? Do they have time travel capability? Do they have interstellar capability? I mean, I don't have the answer to any of these things, and I don't rule anything out either.
I don't either.
Yeah, when a new whistleblower comes along, like you, I'm willing to listen, but you can't engage in, obvious, over-the-top, self-grandiose glorification and turning yourself into a obvious business enterprise as the first and foremost thing, while at the same time you're telling the world that you're an ambassador for humanity to this other species. Like that, come on, like stop that.
Yeah, well, the problem with the secret space program, you've mentioned crash and retrievals. I think there's another important aspect to this that Hoagland has been driving home ever since he first started writing about monuments of Mars, and that is the quest for artifacts that may be found off world. I think there's a good case to be made that there are some very strange things on the moon. There's some very strange things on Mars. Even Carl Sagan admitted that.
Yeah.
You've got, Iapetus doing all of its strange stuff around Saturn and looking very strange, quite frankly. So there's this aspect of secret space program as well, that it is quite apparent that they're actively looking for things. So that aspect too, I think, has to be borne in mind, that this is part of the nuts and bolts of it. The problem I have with these ambassadors, George Adamski, Corey Goode, is, if you're going to choose an ambassador for humanity, it would make sense to me that you'd study human culture and pick someone in an institution like the papacy, for example, that has an historical claim to be an institution with that kind of universal appeal, with that kind of universal jurisdiction. But picking, Joe Schmo off the street, that's never made much sense to me. Why would they do that? Why would they try to bypass the normal infrastructure of human institutions and communication? So, there's all of these things, but like you, I take the position, Richard, that if you've got trillions of dollars over several decades being spent on this stuff, really, if you stop and think about it, that means, quite frankly, that they could have developed stuff exactly as some of these whistleblowers have claimed. Ben Rich, even. If you look at some of his alleged statements toward the end of his life, that they have pressed the technology way, way beyond what we see publicly. And again, this is something I brought out in SS Brotherhood of the Bell. You had very definitely a kind of a two-track program inside of Germany. You had the rockets, and then you had all this other strange stuff going on, that was super secret and shows up in this country after the war. So you've got so much data that, like you, I think it's a virtual certainty that this program exists, and not just in this country either. We've got the Russians have been investigating this since the end of the war. Certainly the Europeans have been involved, the British, the French. So it's not that we're looking even at one secret space program. I think that this is something that's probably a global phenomenon to a certain extent.
Yeah, I want to back up a little bit to something you said, because I've thought about this many times as well, which is, when I would talk about the fact that I don't believe Corey Goode's story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it, and it has nothing to do with my assessment of him as a person. I don't believe him.
Right.
It's hard. You can't force me to believe him, so I just, I can't play nice about it. But people would say to me, yeah, but don't you think that some of what he's saying could be true anyway? Like, even if you don't believe that he's the guy, could it be that he's telling things that are true, even if you don't think he's been involved? Like, is it possible? Or dealing with people like Andrew Basiago, is it possible that there's portal technology to go to Mars or and back? Is it possible that you can play with time in such a way that you can go forward and then back? And I mean, I guess my first answer is I don't know, and I'd say it could be possible, but I don't know. But with all of these cases, like, I'm always willing to listen to a whistleblower, but like I was saying all along, you got to give us something here to go on, rather than just a fun story that could be true. And in the case of Corey Goode, I want to mention this again. I talked about it last night on Jimmy Church. I'm pretty sure I've talked about this elsewhere, but that's the Project Avalon server data, which, a couple of years, actually 1 year ago, the folks over there did some checking on the ISPs that Corey Goode was known to have been using in essentially data mining the Project Avalon server data. And they found about 6,500 specific threads that he had gone through over a period of about 4 years in great detail. It's an incredible amount of going through. And the Avalon site is it's a really interesting forum. There's a lot of very smart people who go there, and they've talked about all of these things like mainstream UFO stuff and fringe UFO stuff. It's all there, and it's all like really interesting discussions. So, and it's a fact that Corey Goode went through that for 4 years before he allegedly remembered that he was part of that very program that he'd been reading about for 4 years. So, I mean, now, if you really want to give him the absolute benefit of the doubt, you could say, and I'm sure people would say, well, he only went into that database because he felt deep inside that there was something going on and he was drawn to it. And I suppose you can make any kind of argument, but from anyone who's got the slightest bit of a skeptical query, you have to acknowledge the other likelihood that he just data mined it, turned himself into an expert as much as one could, and then came out with this information and made himself into a star.
That's the way I would look at it. And that's one of the reasons I think, Richard, that we're looking at something perhaps behind him, because that's an extreme amount of stuff. It's almost as if someone was looking at all the basic memes that were being discussed and creating a template to go out and market. And again, I think Dark Journalist Insight here is right on the point that this is a marketing operation. What you do when you market something is you go out and study the market. What are they talking about? What are the phrases they're using, and so on and so forth. And then you package a product to market to that specific group of people.
Oh, I agree completely. I mean, it's completely marketed toward the Southern California New Age community, like 100%. That's a huge market. Lots of money. Lots of money.
And this is the way it looks to me. And by the same token, this is kind of the way I'm looking at Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, because if you look at what Mr. DeLonge has said, he is attempting deliberately to target and market something to a group of people, not necessarily the California New Age community, but a group of people that are much more down to earth, much more nuts and bolts,
right?
And market to that group of people. So we've got these two marketing operations going on at the same time, and this is what makes me think that there's perhaps some coordination behind both of them.
Well, maybe. I mean, all of that has to be dug out, and evidence would have to be found to support that hypothesis. I would personally be surprised if there were, but hey, anything is possible. I see them as separate developments at this time, but who knows? I mean, who knows? I think one thing that we can definitely say is that the UFO field has gone through its ups and downs over many, many years, but we've continually made, I feel, we make progress bit by bit. And we have crises, we have attempts to derail it, often, incidentally, with provable government connections. And but I feel we recover. Like research continues, the phenomenon remains, and I think that it's going to prove to be impossible to stop genuine, good analysis of what we loosely call the UFO phenomenon from continuing. I think we'll keep going.
Oh, I quite agree. The whistleblower phenomenon, like you, I'm very, very skeptical of Corey Goode. In fact, I'm so skeptical I really don't spend that much time with him at all. Yeah, but there's a world of difference between a whistleblower or alleged whistleblower like him and, let's say, Bob Dean, who just passed away recently. With him, he came out with specific details and specific things that you could go check. And when you check the context of what he's saying, it's credible.
That's right.
And
That's right. There's got to be some reference that an independent investigator can then go back to and look into and say, this looks right, this doesn't look right. And if a whistleblower doesn't do that, then they're not really a whistleblower, it seems to me.
No, exactly. They're not a whistleblower. What they are is they're claiming a special revelation and trying to impose their status as the magisterium to interpret it. That's where I'm highly skeptical.
I want to ask you, and this is really, we're going out into the blue yonder here, but I want to know, like, do you think that there really could be an element of a secret space program that deals with Mars and that deals with a cadre of classified astronauts and missions that are going to Mars?
I think it's possible, simply because the amount of things that have been made public in the last 10 years, EM Drive, DARPA's goal of making the United States warp capable in 100 years, NASA's warp drive project under Dr. Harold White, and so on and so forth. The fact that they're willing to admit publicly that these things are going on, when you put that in the context of some of the things that have been learned by and from whistleblowers, and you look at some of the pictures that the European Space Agency has taken of Mars or Phobos and so on and so forth, you add it all together, and I think it's very possible that something like that could be going on under our noses. Because let's face it, Richard, we're talking right now about going out and mining asteroids and so on and so forth. And I've said this over and over again. You simply are not going to be able to do this with chemical rockets. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So there has to be, by implication of their even acknowledging that they want to do this, there has to be a commensurate technology that they may know of and probably do know of that's going to permit them to do that. So I think, in a certain sense, if you look at this trickle of information that's coming out publicly, with all of these programs, Lockheed Martin talking about their little fusion reactor that fits on the back of a truck, and so on and so forth. When you look at this steady drip of information, what I really think is going on here is that they're trying to prepare people for a dramatic change in the way they live and the technology available and so on and so forth. And again, going back to this hypothesis that we may be looking at operations, maybe one of the reasons that they are attempting to gain a lockdown on the narrative is precisely because somehow this is necessary in order to roll out all of these things.
I think that's quite reasonable. I also have felt for a long time that there is very likely a classified component that deals with Mars and the moon, using black world technology. I'm sure you have spoken to such people. I've spoken to a number of engineers and people, retired. One former at Boeing who told me pretty explicitly about black triangle technology that Boeing was working on in the 80s and 90s. That seemed to have off-world capabilities. Yeah, I think that they're going off, and I don't know if they're living there in a kind of alternative 3 scenario, but I do think that there's action there. I spoke to another scientist. I have to mention him at some point, but he just told me years ago that a lot of the folks in his very rarefied circles were looking carefully at the Mars anomalies, that this was actually a very important thing for them.
Yeah,
it was not a joke. It was something very serious. So there's, I think, something about it that's important. But what is the nature of it? I don't think it's going to be looking like a Hollywood movie. So that's
No.
been my direction all along. And if it is like a Hollywood movie, even that's okay if someone can give us something other than other whistleblowers who are basically piling on. What's ironic is that here in Jason Rice, there is another whistleblower who, in theory, would provide confirmation
Right.
to a good story, and instead they're going at it.
Right.
So that didn't really work out very well. So, well, I don't know how much more time you've got, Joseph.
I'm good.
You,
I'm good. You want to keep talking? I'm good.
well, I think we can talk for as long as we've got something to say here about it. I have a feeling we can probably come back to this
Sure.
at some point in the future. There's always more. I mean, I'm interested in talking with you about a lot of the aspects of this. The finances. How is this all being paid for? That's something we should probably bring Catherine in for a three-way conversation on that sometime, where we can really hash that out. And also, I would be interested in asking you, actually, if you have an opinion on, this is probably pushing you a little bit, but do you have an opinion on whether there is, or how substantial is a non-human element to the UFO phenomenon in general? I mean, people who follow you and they know your work know that you've done a tremendous amount of research on the connection of UFO technology to the Nazis.
Mm.
And to other clandestine black budget groups going on today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really clear, even to me, like where you are exactly in your idea about aliens, no aliens, is it an extraterrestrial phenomenon or not, and so forth. And does that factor into your understanding of the UFO phenomenon at all?
Well, it does. You know, I've said many times that I'm not philosophically opposed at all to the idea of extraterrestrials. I mean, you know, Nicholas of Cusa was talking about this way back in the late Middle Ages. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't do it simply because there's so many other people doing it. It's not something that I feel any particular expertise on. As far as the subject of extraterrestrials goes, my problem with the black military technology only crowd is that and I think I've said this before on some of your shows. My problem here is that you're dealing, in my opinion, with far too many strange and weird things, and some of them not even on this planet. As you've pointed out, there's all of these strange things going on in space. To my mind, it really makes no sense to me to try and assign all this to human black project technology. That's problem number one. Problem number two is I'm not closing off the idea of Mac Tunney's idea of crypto-terrestrials. In other words, that there may be a species, or perhaps more than one species, that lives under the earth, or perhaps even on the ocean floors. You know, that's the other great frontier that we really haven't explored that much. So it could be any combination of the above. I think the problem in ufology, as I see it, Richard, is that you've got people seeking one all-encompassing hypothesis to explain it all, and I don't think it's a phenomenon that is monolithic in nature. I think you're dealing with several different phenomena. And when you get right down to it, there could be spiritual aspects to this. There could be extra dimensional beings. There could be extraterrestrials. There could be crypto-terrestrials. There could be military black projects and all of the above. I'm more of a both and person than an either or person. And so I'm not close to the idea at all. It's just something that I don't investigate because there's so many other people, yourself and so many others in the ufology community, that have done that.
Yeah, no, that's a fair answer. And actually, it's really funny. For many years before we met in person, and I was only familiar with you through your books. It's easy to form an opinion about someone based on certain things that On a book, exactly. And then you realize that we all see reality in a much more nuanced way. And I'm totally with you on that.
Well, it's the bottom line is something that we all learn in academic research. You can't assume that just because someone has published a book, that book contains everything they have to say about a subject. There's people out there that think still to this day that I think Nazis built UFO bases in Antarctica. Well, no, I've written lots of books about, about this whole subject. Reading one isn't the whole story. This is the problem. And even then, as well as I do that you simply can't get everything you want to say down in one book because the subject is too immense. It's too complex. There's too many details that have to be considered. So you try and focus on certain details in each book, and it's the whole series that tells the story.
We also evolve. I could say
exactly.
That I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago when I jumped into this field.
Right. Same here.
So, yeah.
Same here.
Well, I'm thinking we've actually covered a heck of a lot here. Why don't we save a little something for the next time? What do you say?
All right, that's okay by me.
I gotta do another show with my wife right here on this channel later tonight. So I want to get ready for that and maybe do a little housework. How about that?
All right.
But, I'm really glad we got to do this, Joseph. And so standard website thing. People can find you at Giza Death Star. I know.
Mm-hmm.
That's your primary website. It's a great site.
Thank you.
You do like unique news analysis like every single day, but not just like conventional news. Like you go into deep, interesting angles on things. Really interesting stuff. I highly recommend your site. It's excellent.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
He's a Death Star. So, okay. Well, look, everyone. Joseph, thanks for doing this with me. And
thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Let's do this again. I want to try to rope in Catherine at some point.
Let's do that
when she's available.
Yeah, let's do that.
She's out and about. All right. Well, everyone, thanks for showing up. Always appreciate it. And until next time. So catch you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Shoot me a link.